Now we're going to waste no time and dive straight into this one. Here are 5 eerie videos that we believe will never be released to the public. Inside the library at Columbine High School. There is a very grim possibility that could exist. A very grim collection of footage that could exist, but will never be released. It would have been filmed on April 20th, 1999, inside of Columbine High School. I'm sure you're all aware of this devastating event. Dylan Klebold and Eric Harris had been planning an attack on their school for some time, and on April 20th carried it out on fellow students, friends and teachers. For those who are not aware, the library was the place that saw the most destruction. Their behaviour inside the library went a long way to fueling the rumours of undisclosed footage. Official reports and survivors' testimony describe the killer's actions as not only chillingly calculated violence, but also dramatic, almost performative acts, as though they believed they were being filmed. After entering at around 11:29 AM, they began shooting indiscriminately at students hiding under tables, taunting some victims before firing, laughing at others, and making nonchalantly callous comments about the murders to those they miraculously let live. In total, 13 individuals were tragically murdered that day, 12 students and 1 teacher, no less than 10 of which were killed inside the library, before the duo turned their guns on themselves, also inside the library. So the question of whether footage exists from inside this room is a valid one. One man by the name of Fred Matten, whose children attended Columbine, said that he believes there were more cameras in the school, stating, "I want to know why we do not know what happened to the camera surveillance. Where are the tapes that were in those cameras?" Investigators also acknowledged not long after the attack that a video surveillance system was located inside the library. Jefferson County Sheriff Sergeant Jim Parr said that he was not sure whether the security system in the library was working or whether investigators had recovered any tapes. He said that if any tapes did exist, they are not likely to be ever released to news media or the public. And since then, they faded into Columbine myth, and nothing more was mentioned. Randy Brown, a common contributor on the Columbine Reddit forums, and father to Brooks Brown, who was friends with Dylan and Eric, stated that there were 3 cameras inside the library as far as he can remember. But then Frank DeAngelis, the former headmaster at Columbine, said that there were no cameras in the library. However, he has had his fair share of criticism over the years, and is not known to be a reliable source of information for Columbine researchers. I must be honest, it does seem highly likely that there were more cameras inside the school, but I think you'll agree it's probably for the best that the footage is never released. However, for some Columbine researchers, they believe that it would give more of an insight into what happened that day, what could have been done differently, and what drove 2 seemingly normal students into America's worst mass school shooters. The Pentagon security camera tapes. Now, this next case is one of the most infamous examples of footage that surely exists, but will almost certainly never be released in full. On September 11, 2001, American Airlines Flight 77 was hijacked and crashed into the western side of the Pentagon at 9:37 AM. All 64 people on board, as well as 125 people inside the building, were killed. Yet to this very day, the actual impact has never been shown to the public in clear detail. What we do have is just 5 frames, a handful of blurry stills, and some footage from a hotel across the street, released by the Department of Defense in the early 2000s. The main one that all of us have probably seen comes from a single parking lot security camera. The frames show a streak of white passing across the screen, then an explosion, a fireball, and thick smoke rising. But just think about this. The Pentagon is one of the most surveilled buildings on Earth. On that morning, there were reports of at least 80 different security cameras around the building capturing footage, not including internal cameras. FBI agents were supposedly documented seizing recordings from a nearby hotel, gas station, and traffic cameras, just hours after the impact, only one of which was ever released: the DoubleTree footage from across the road. The official explanation is that the government withheld the tapes for national security reasons, arguing they could reveal vulnerabilities in Pentagon security or show sensitive building layouts. Others claim the unreleased footage is simply too graphic, potentially showing the final seconds of passengers' lives. But it goes without saying that the lack of footage has fueled decades of speculation and conspiracy. Some argue that the footage was deliberately hidden to conceal inconsistencies in the official story. Others believe the tapes would prove nothing more than what we already know, that a hijacked plane struck the Pentagon, and that releasing them would do little to silence doubts. However, even those who do not believe in conspiracy theories admit that it's unsettling that there are probably many angles and tapes that exist that could dispel conspiracies that are not being released. Just like the alleged Columbine footage or Timothy Treadwell's final recording, the Pentagon impact tapes most likely sit in a vault somewhere, unlikely to ever be released. I'd love to know if the full footage came out tomorrow, would it change your views on anything? Leaked Area 51 alien interview. In 1997, a documentary entitled Area 51: The Alien Interview was released in the United States, purporting to show leaked footage of an extraterrestrial being who'd been held and questioned within the notorious Area 51 Air Force Base at Groom Lake, southern Nevada. The leak came from an anonymous whistleblower known only as Victor, who claimed to have smuggled the tape out of the Air Force Base while he was visiting for undisclosed reasons in the early 1990s, alleging that the footage itself was actually taken in 1989. Naturally, many are skeptical of Victor's claims, especially considering that the full tape has never actually been released. We've only ever seen less than an 8-minute snippet, while the rest supposedly remains confidential after 28 years. The alien in the footage conforms closely to the stereotypical grey archetype popularized in post-1940s UFO culture. A small humanoid figure with an enlarged bulbous cranium, smooth hairless skin, no ears, narrow chin, and large black, almost almond-shaped eyes. Its skin tone appears mottled and brownish tan under the subdued lighting, though the poor image quality makes precise colouring and even details uncertain. Seated at a table, apparently restrained or too weak to move freely, it occasionally shifts its head and torso in slow, deliberate motions, and its facial expressions, if they are indeed expressions, are subtle and limited largely to eye movement and slight head tilts. Bizarrely, Victor claimed that the alien spoke only via telepathy, and that seated behind the camera was a specialist communicating with it in silence, when suddenly it began to become agitated and struggle, almost appearing unable to breathe. Becoming laboured, it begins making jerking movements, as if in pain or struggling to inhale, and at this point, two figures, claimed to be inept medical personnel by Victor, enter the frame and appear to administer aid, but the camera angle prevents a clear view of any procedures being performed. This is where the clip ends, leaving an age-old debate over authenticity, credibility, and conspiracy. What do you make of this one? Is the full video out there, waiting to be released? Or is this an elaborate hoax? Some of it looks so fake that it could be real, and that's why they only released a few minutes worth of footage. Just enough for people to think that it's ridiculous and brush it off as fake, when in reality, this is the real deal. What do you think? Timothy Treadwell's horrific end.
It's important that every bear knows who I am and that I fit on their hierarchy if I'm to survive.
Is it going to happen that one day we read a news article about you being eaten by one of these bears?
No, and
Well, that's exactly what happened. A self-proclaimed bear enthusiast, environmentalist, and filmmaker, Treadwell, spent 13 summers living amongst the grizzly bears in Alaska's Columbine National Park, stating that his aim was to protect these animals and raise awareness about their conservation. But his approach, living in close proximity with grizzlies and considering himself one of their own, was reckless, and as one researcher noted, his death was tragic but not unpredictable. In October 2003, Treadwell and his girlfriend Amy Huguenot remained in Columbine National Park later than usual, when the peninsula grizzly's natural source of food was scarce, and they were preparing for the winter. On the night of October 5th, a 28-year-old male grizzly, weighing around 1,000 pounds, entered the couple's campsite, most likely food-stressed and roaming late in the season for hibernation supplies. When the attack began, Treadwell's camera was switched on, potentially getting ready for a nighttime shoot, but because its lens was covered, only around 6 minutes of audio was captured before the tape ran out. Yet during this time, it recorded Treadwell's agonizing screams for help and his futile attempts to fight off the bear, along with Amy's terrifying screams and calls for him to play dead before she attempted to reach him. The couple's mauled remains were recovered by park rangers, who shot and killed the bear shortly after securing the site, and then examined its stomach contents, confirming it had largely consumed both victims. Whilst the original recordings have never been publicly released and have supposedly been locked away in a bank vault, there are numerous horrific recreations of those final 6 minutes, the most infamous of which is reportedly just as distressingly accurate and realistic to the true audio short of Timothy and Amy being eaten alive. "It's the most terrifying thing I've ever heard in my life," I told her. "You should never listen to it. You should destroy it. It should not be sitting on your shelf in your living room." These were the words of director Werner Herzog moments after he'd listened to the official audio tape, which only a few people on Earth have done so. It's incredibly unlikely that the original will ever be publicly released, but the question is, if it does, would you listen to it? The 1964 Vandenberg Air Force Base incident.
And he said, "What was that?" And I said, "It looks to me like we got a UFO."
On September 22, 1964, United States Air Force Lieutenant Robert Jacobs and his team were stationed high in the Los Padres National Forest above Big Sur, California. They were tasked with collecting low light level photography of ICBM launches from Vandenberg Air Force Base, situated a little over 100 miles to the south. But a routine photo shoot turned into something entirely different. The following clip is a reconstruction of the event that unfolded, based on Jacobs' testimony, as the original footage has never been released by the US government.
It flew into the frame like this, and it shot a beam of light at the warhead, which is represented by my thumb here. Now, remember, all this stuff is flying at several thousand miles an hour. So this thing fires a beam of light at the warhead, hits it, and then this thing flies up like this. Meanwhile, we're all going like this, fires another beam of light, goes around like this, we're going like this, fires another beam of light, goes down like this, fires another beam of light, and then flies out the way it came in. And the warhead tumbles out of space. Now, I saw that. I don't give a goddamn what anybody else says about it. I saw that on film.
Upholding confidentiality until 1982, Jacobs then publicly stated in the National Enquirer that his team had indeed captured film of an intelligently controlled flying device that tracked the missile and emitted an energy beam that appeared to disable it, maintaining that a cover-up was ushered in place by the United States government and the Pentagon, and that he was sworn to secrecy. United States Air Force Major Florenz Mansman, another senior member of the 1964 team, later seemed to confirm Jacobs' account in a letter to a UFO researcher before his death. However, in 1993, Kingston A. George, the project engineer in charge of the Big Sur missile program and on the ground on the morning of the test, published a rebuttal in the Skeptical Inquirer challenging Jacobs' UFO account. According to George, there was nothing at all otherworldly about the footage taken that day. What Jacobs had interpreted as a disc-shaped craft firing an energy beam at the missile, he argued, was in reality the perfectly mundane, if unusual-looking behavior of missile countermeasures. The Atlas missile, or Buzzing Bee as it was nicknamed, was programmed to release dummy warheads and metallic chaff, lightweight strips, or thin pieces of material, often aluminum or materialized glass fiber, specifically intended to confuse or overwhelm the radar systems of potential Soviet anti-missile defenses. During this launch, the deployment sequence did not go as planned, and the decoys became entangled in their own protective packaging materials, supposedly resulting in a mass of debris and highly reflected chaff tumbling in unusual ways alongside the warhead. Through a high magnification telescope, George contended this tangled cloud of objects could easily create the illusion of a structured craft maneuvering near the missile, while sunlight glinting off the reflective debris could have appeared as brief flashes or beams of light. Despite its technical jargon and mundane explanation, many are not convinced by Kingston's account, amongst them Jacobs himself, who swears that what he caught on camera that day was not of this earth. After all, why would the Pentagon keep such a tight lid on the footage over 60 years later if it merely showed the routine behavior of now long obsolete missiles? You would think they could easily dispel this conspiracy by releasing the footage, but they haven't. What's your thoughts on this one? So that's it for this video. Thanks for watching, and as always, we'll see you next time.